Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Brett from ActiveProspect, and today we're excited to talk about one of the biggest industry challenges in lead generation and how our new TrustedForm Bot Detection helps you identify and block non-human leads before they ever hit your CRM. I'm joined by two experts who built this product from the ground up, Christopher Williams, Product Manager at TrustedForm, and Chris Snyder, Director of Product Data and Insights. Thanks for being here, guys. Now, let's jump right in. Christopher, let's start with the big picture. When we talk about bot generated leads, some people picture obviously fake submissions, but that's not usually the case, right? How do these bots actually show up in a buyer's funnel?
Well, happy to be here. And yeah, that's not generally the case. At first glance, when you see these leads, they might look legitimate actually. Like they'll be using real names, real email addresses, even real phone numbers. But underneath all that, there's no person. And that simple fact creates ripple effects across your entire funnel. And the most obvious of that is the cost of the wasted ad spend there. Every time that a bot submits your form, it represents media dollars that are spent on a bad lead.
And can you break down what that cost really looks like at scale?
Sure thing. So, like, let's say you're paying $50 per qualified lead for 1,000 leads a month. If even 1% of your leads are bots, then that's $500 that you may be throwing away every month, not even counting the downstream costs of sales and follow up and all that. But in reality, the financial i- impact goes even beyond that. Bots distort your performance data, like your CPLs and conversion rates, and making optimization decisions less accurate. You might start shifting spend toward or away from certain channels or publishers based on their performance, when in reality, it's the bots that are inflating the metrics. So this results in opportunity costs that could be the difference between the success or failure of a campaign. And then the less visible, but in my opinion, the most dangerous cost is the compliance exposure. In most cases, express written consent is required before contacting a consumer because of the TCPA. Problem is that a bot can't give consent. So if a non-human submission triggers a call or a text campaign, then you could be at risk of violating the TCPA, even if it looks like that what you were relying on was a legitimate lead with legitimate consent. If it was a bot, plot twist, it wasn't. And because many of the traditional fraud tools rely on like IP address or device reputation signals that can easily be spoofed, you may just never know that a bot was behind the consent that was on your form. So the cost really isn't just wasted spend, it's potential legal liability and brand risk. And since the TCPA violation can cost you from anywhere from $500 to $1,500 per call, and there's a risk of class action lawsuit, the value of that liability quickly climbs into the millions. And we just recently met with a customer who didn't realize that they had over $400 million in TCPA liability just for bots in about 6 months. Now, the third cost that we haven't talked about is trust between buyers and the sellers in the lead system.
What do you mean by that exactly?
Well, when bots fill out your funnel, it doesn't just hurt your performance, it damages your relationship with, partners. If you're a buyer who gets a bot, you probably lose faith in that publisher. That publisher is going to lose credibility with their advertisers. So like imagine if you're buying leads from somebody and found out that 100% of the leads from one of their sources last month were bots. Chances are you're not going to trust anything from them anymore. And if you really pay attention to all these costs, they add up in a really meaningful way. They can completely change the course of your business, or simply put you out of business. And you won't know what's happening unless you take action to actually monitor and identify the problem.
Wow, that's very interesting. And now that we have a greater picture on the problem itself, let's dig into how we actually detect these bots using TrustedForm. Christopher, can you kick us off?
Sure. So our bot detection product is really cool. It evaluates a visitor's execution environment, the on-page display characteristics, and behaviors for patterns that are highly correlated with automated tools. So we look for any kind of signal that can indicate an automation-specific browser context. and things that don't quite match up, like if the device is claim type and what we actually see aren't quite the same, or if there's patterns that aren't consistent with the ways that humans actually use forms, those can all be signals that it's a bot. And these checks are really lightweight, they're privacy conscious, and we continually monitor them to update them. We consolidate all of this into a simple to use data point within the Trusted Form Insights product. So all you have to do is have a Trusted Form certificate, and then you can request it. And this can be done really easily if you have Lead Conduit, or you can actually work directly with the Trusted Form certificate API. But either way, I guarantee you it's really simple. And there are some other systems outside of ActiveProspect too, like Bobberdo, that have added support for this already. And in their system, it's as simple as just checking a box that basically says, hey, rejecting the lead that looks like a bot. So if you want to find out if your system supports it, you should ask them directly. And a lot of times they won't offer support until a couple of customers actually request it. So if you don't have it right now, don't fret, just give it a try, ask them out, and hopefully they'll be able to add that for you soon. And then once you have that data, all that's left is to actually use it to take some action.
Awesome. And Chris Snyder, I know you've been deep in the algorithm itself. Let's get a little more specific. Can you share some of the behavioral or environment level indicators that the algorithm looks at to flag bot activity?
Sure. Yeah. Good to be here, everyone. I guess I'll start by saying that, well, Trusted Form's DNA has been and is in documenting consent, right? Being present as the consumer is filling out the form and documenting exactly that consent and having a compliant flow for that reason. But it turns out the data that is captured to document that consent is actually highly relevant to identifying bots, like Christopher was saying. Things like the visitor's browser execution environment and page interactions, such as mouse movements, clicks, scrolls, and so forth. There's also network-based signals. So I think the most common of which that I think people be familiar with is the IP address. Trusted Form can see all of that data, right? And so the algorithm could make use of any of it or all of it to flag bot-like behavior. And so, yeah, we just sort of took all that data and created what we think is a lightweight, privacy conscious and simple to interpret algorithm. So it's literally just sort of a decision. Hey, we think this is a bot or not. And this is really by design. We wanted something super simple and reliable to help our customers get started with removing these bot generated leads from their flows. So, and over time, we anticipate we will capture more different types of bots as they adapt to us and we adapt to them. That's just sort of the name of the game for bot detection and fraud detection in general. But for some specific examples, so again, Christopher kind of alluded to this before, but like it's very common for visitors, for fraudsters to claim to be a certain device or a certain type, a class of device, but actually it's sort of server in some sort of data center somewhere, right? So a visitor could claim to be on an iPhone, but they manipulate what's called the user agent string and a few other things. But if we sort of peek under the hood, some of the browser attributes actually indicate it is sort of a Linux server in a data center somewhere. So that's an obvious form of fraud we've been seeing. Another example is around typing speed that we observe on the form. Oftentimes, or not often, but we do see typing faster than the world's fastest typist, right? So that's a pretty unlikely event. And by the way, the trivia fact, 305 words per minute is the fastest typist in the world. So that you can use that as your benchmark. And finally, I mentioned IP address earlier. IP address originates from a data center located overseas, right? So that should be an uncommon event for consumers, US-based consumers. So we can take that information and kind of use that to help us kind of triangulate bots.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I feel like I've been a victim of my iPhone phone number being submitted to some of these forms because I get like 30 calls a day from random numbers asking me if I want to buy something. So I think that's a good segue into talking about like the real world application. Like once bot detection flags a lead as non-human, what should buyers actually do with that information?
You mean you don't remember filling out those 50 forms to get, telemarketing calls, Brett?
No, not at all.
Of course. All right. Well, yeah. The safest and recommended thing that you should really do is check every lead before you purchase it to see if it's a bot. And honestly, you should just immediately reject it anytime it is. Don't bid on it. Don't add it to your CRM. Don't call it. Nothing. Now, I know some customers are opposed to this because it may put a strain on the relationship that you have with your vendor if you're rejecting their leads and saying, hey, these are bots. Or maybe it'll reduce your volume and you're like, no, I need to have a certain amount of leads to keep my business going. Or maybe you're just, like, I don't want to pass up any opportunities for some extra cash. To that, the first thing that I'll tell you is that our bot detection has a near 0% false positive rate. So the chances of you rejecting a genuine human-generated lead are so slim that they're negligible. Now, second is that the risk just really isn't worth it. I don't know, maybe if your leads are worth $1 million each, maybe then it is worth it because you're paying so much for them. But you, like I already talked about, the cost that can come with you actually contacting a bot lead, class action lawsuits, everything else that can come with it are generally way more than what you paid. So it's just really not worth going down that road. Now, if your vendor expects you to pay for leads that we can tell are bots before you've ever worked it, honestly, that's just not a healthy relationship. That might be one that you want to talk about and see if you can find ways to improve it for sure. Now, if your lead volume drops because you remove some bot generated leads, I know that might be scary, but it's actually a good thing. It actually frees up resources to be spent on better leads and increases your chances at actually, having more success. I promise you, if you're contacting real people, that's going to be more successful for you in the long term rather than contacting bots. Now, if your company is more risk tolerant and you have some reason to not reject these leads, then you should probably still use bot detection so that you at least have the information that you need and you can actually find a way to react appropriately. So maybe you don't want to do the thing that I already said, but maybe instead you want to do something like move those leads to a queue for a more manual review. Or maybe you want to change the method that you contact them so that you're not violating the TCPA or violating other regulations. But regardless, if you're getting bot leads, there's something that you need to do. So make sure that you actually can take action further upstream to correct the issues once you actually have collected enough of that.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And talking about from a compliance lens, Chris, what does the presence of bots mean for outreach?
I think, yeah, so Christopher covered this pretty well. So a bot-generated lead cannot provide consent to be contacted, right, on behalf of a real consumer, at least not yet. So even if a lead has a real phone number, which we know that does happen, right? So bot-generated leads often do have real contact information and can be reached, theoretically. So even though you have that, under the TCPA, that lead cannot be dialed. So that makes things pretty simple, I'd say, from a compliance perspective.
So you're telling me if I had ChatGPT like submit my information to be in a draw for shoes, like that's not me giving
Not yet. Not yet. It's a dynamic landscape, but not yet.
Oh man, that's pretty wild to think about. But you also like alluded to this a bit earlier. You talked with our early adopters of bot detection. Like, what results or trends have been emerging already, and also what advice would you give to those worried about bots?
Yeah, this is definitely more nuanced, but I'd say from a performance standpoint, what we've seen is that bot-generated leads convert at a lower rate, which I think is intuitively makes sense. It's typically much lower, right? So not just sort of barely lower, but substantially lower than non-bot-generated leads. And as I said before, bot-generated leads can convert, so you should expect to see some conversions, especially at really high volumes, but it should be very low. And based on a handful of customers who were kind enough to share some of their conversion data with us, the return on ad spend is definitely below one. So that's something that it probably varies by vertical, by customer, but that's a general trend we've seen across the board. It probably varies by degree, but generally speaking, that's what you should see and what we've seen. And in terms of general advice, whether you're a buyer or seller of leads, and this is really maybe good life advice too. It's something I try to follow, is always assume positive intent. So when you're having conversations with your vendors or affiliates, in the world of digital fraud, it's not really always clear who is the perpetrator and who is actually the victim. It's actually really hard to tell sometimes, even if you're an investigator into these things. So the general good advice is to not immediately take drastic action, cut sources, remove sources, but rather to reach out and have conversations, right? So your partners may be willing or just as willing to address this bot problem as much as you are, and it actually could be a great way of strengthening that partnership by having those conversations.
Yeah, that's great life advice right there. Just we know the old cliche of assuming, so I won't say it on this webinar, but everyone knows it.
Easier said than done, but definitely good.
Yeah, and this has been incredibly insightful. Bots are one of the most hidden yet costly obstacles in the lead generation space. And TrustedForm Bot Detection finally gives buyers the visibility and control they need to protect their spend, performance, and compliance posture. If you want to learn more about bot detection, feel free to request a demo. Christopher and Chris, thank you again for sharing your expertise. And thanks for everyone that joined us today.
Thanks for having us.
Great being here.